Hello, young scholars. This is Mr. Martyr. I'm with your flip classroom on the Age of Enlightenment, the age of enlightened thinkers, and the age of reason. And in this video, we're going to talk about the economist Adam Smith. We're also going to talk about the political differences between two Americans, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. So before we get started, let's recap. What is the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason? So it is during this time period that this Age of Enlightenment is a rebellion against the Age of Absolutism. So we have to naturally ask ourselves, well, what is absolutism? So absolutism is when kings and queens, the kings of Spain, France, and England, governed with the doctrine of divine right, where they believed that God gave the ruling families the power over their citizens. And we saw that in the late 1600s, that current of thought began changing with philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, where those philosophers believe that people have natural rights, such as life, liberty, and property, and that people enter into the social contract in order to give up some of those rights for the good of the government. So really, the Renaissance kicks off this point. We see it in the 1500s with the Protestant Reformation. We'll see it in the 1600s with the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution. And we're going to talk about it today in the 1700s with the American Revolution, how people's thoughts and attitudes changed towards institutions. So the first thing about Adam Smith is you need to know that he argued that man is an animal that makes bargains. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about his philosophy in a second, but that's kind of a principal quote associated with Adam Smith. And he also believes in something called laissez-faire economics. And laissez-faire economics, laissez-faire is simply a word that means hands-off policy. And he believed that the government should not be involved in the economy whatsoever. Nothing to do. And this stems from the fact that the government of England really had some problems with the colonies of Great Britain. They were interfering with the colonists. They were telling the colonists what to do, how much to purchase products for. And the colonists really in America did not care for it. They did not like it. So Adam Smith writes in his book, the book is called The Wealth of Nations in 1776. And he argues that nations should be allowed to trade freely and that the wealth of a nation depends on its labor force and that a government should not interfere in the economy. And this is a quintessential question that governments and people to this day still debate. How much government should there be in the economy, if any? Should the government, establish a minimum wage? Should the government give out loans for colleges? Should the government tell people how much they can charge for a price? Should the government step in and break up things that they consider to be monopolies? So these are all elements that we still debate today. So I want to get into a little bit of Adam Smith's philosophy. So Adam Smith says two things. He says that people act out of self-interest and that people also require goods and services that others provide. For example, you may not have a medical degree, but if you get sick, you're going to need to go to a doctor. So because that doctor has an expertise, a rarity, if you will, that doctor can charge whatever he or she would like. So therefore, the conclusion, we therefore must exchange goods or money between us in a way that benefits both parties. And his conclusion, he says, man is an animal that makes bargains. So, for example, if you are an expert in the field of law, maybe you become a lawyer. And maybe one day you need a lawyer because you're in a car accident, or maybe you need a will or a power of attorney, or maybe some other matter comes up. Well, you don't have the expertise to be a lawyer, but you go to someone who is an expert in that field, and they can charge what they feel is appropriate. But if it's too much, if it's too expensive, you can go elsewhere because man is an animal that makes bargains. Even a simpler occasion, if you go to get your hair cut, you may go to one person. And if you don't like how they do it, you can go to someone else. Or maybe there's someone else that's cheaper. Why? Because man is an animal that makes bargains. So deeply rooted in Adam Smith's theory is this idea of competition, that people will compete for business and entrepreneurs will compete to keep their prices low in the economic theories. So these economic theories hold true somewhat. And that gives rise to 1776 and the great moment of the Declaration of Independence. And one of the reasons, again, lots of people think that the main reason that America separated from Great Britain was simply because of they wanted independence or they wanted not to pay taxes. But many of them were small business owners, including guys like John Hancock and many others were small business owners that didn't want Great Britain interceding in the affairs of the colonies. Once America is created, the boundaries are drawn between the two political philosophies, and that's of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Two great Americans who co-authored the Declaration of Independence, but had fundamentally different views on how American society and how American politics should govern. So Thomas Jefferson's doctrine is that common men can participate in government. That includes farmers, that includes the gentleman farmers of Virginia. The uneducated can participate. There shouldn't be a land holding requirement. John Adams, on the other hand, believes that men of affluence, the aristocracy, should participate in government. And what's the sense of participating in government if you're not intelligent enough to make the appropriate decisions? And he argued that Thomas Jefferson's, theory that the common man can participate. Well, if the common man is not educated enough to participate in government, that's going to be problematic. And you end up with a government run by the mob. Jefferson thought that the government should consist of a loose confederation of states, but the states should be supreme, not a federal government. Thomas Jefferson, as we know, co-authors the Declaration of Independence with John Adams. He also authors the Notes on the State of Virginia. John Adams believes in a strong bicameral legislature with separation of powers. And if we remember from our discussions of Baron de Montesquieu, we know that his idea of a separated power divided amongst three branches of government we get straight from France, and also that word bi meaning two, cameral meaning houses, a two-house legislature, which is actually what the United States has today. We have a two-house legislature, the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. He also co-authors the Declaration of Independence. He's on that committee with Thomas Jefferson, and he authors the Massachusetts State Constitution. Right? Thomas Jefferson says that the government should work to include skilled workers and small farmers and plantation owners. Again, going back to the idea of the common man. John Adams argues that really the only people that should be participating are people that own property and have wealth. He also argued that only the educated people should participate. Again, going to this idea of elitism versus the common man. Who should participate? And what ends up happening is that we have a nice blend of the two philosophies of these government. We have a government where once you turn 18, you can register to vote and you can participate in government regardless of whether or not you have a college degree or master's degree or PhD degree or no high school degree. Anyone, regardless of income, you don't need to own property. Under the 19th Amendment, women have the right to vote. Under the 15th Amendment, African Americans have the right to vote. So all of this plays into the idea of freedom, and we have a really nice compromise. We have a government where we have a strong central government, but we also have independent state governments that can operate freely of the federal government. So everyone works kind of in concert with one another. It's interesting to note that Jefferson and Adams, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, were pretty close friends. They were close collaborators. But as the American Revolution subsided and the American political parties began to take shape, their differences were more pronounced, and eventually they would split ways once Jefferson was John Adams' vice president. They go through a period of time where they actually don't speak to one another. But towards the end of their lives, they rekindle their friendship, and really in an amazing friendship that is documented with letters back and forth. They write letters to each other talking about the role of government, and they ask themselves, what was the meaning of the American Revolution? It's quite brilliant. They end up dying on the same day. Fun fact. They die 50 years to the day of them signing the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1826. Thomas Jefferson actually dies first, but John Adams, being unaware that Jefferson died hours earlier, his dying words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But it's often said that Jefferson and Adams were the North and South Pole of the American Revolution that really guided the nation. One man is remarked to have said that Um, some men fought. Well, Jefferson and Adams, they thought for us all. They did the thinking of the revolution. They were our American philosophers. All right. So if you need to go back through and get any of this material again, you can watch the video again. Make sure you get those notes, and we're going to have a pretty great discussion and debate about the role of government and natural rights in the coming weeks that I look forward to.